Anja, thank you very much. I like the sandwich characterization of the three different levels there. The international level, nation-state level, and then the sort of grassroots, local level for approaching this human rights issue as such. There is one very good point that you made also that I thought was very important, that, I mean, there are human rights problems in many countries, including democracies, but the democracies are the ones that can actually tackle them, while different countries, shall we call them authoritarian, they often can't. Of course, as I, in my words of introduction at the beginning of this panel, said that the issue is already old, the human rights issue. And of course, we wouldn't be sitting here if we knew how to solve it now. So can the current human rights system deal with human rights challenges? This remains a big open question, I think, for years to come. Of course, yes, you sort of provoked, I think, everybody by saying that nation states possibly are not the actors that can actually solve human rights issues. So let's see. Hopefully there are questions, and hopefully we can also give answers to this. But thank you for that point. And the fundamental problem, yes, who can, at the end of the day, resolve these issues? So the shift of power, or shift of the debate, I think, from the international to nation-state level to actually the role of that civil society plays in the debate. It's an important one. I mean, I have my academic background from the London University of School of Oriental and African Studies, and I mean, this is a new word. I mean, NGO, local grassroots level, involving them in a debate. And in fact, we have this debate now in Estonia again, after sort of some internal political issues here. So the issue hasn't gone away, even though we don't discuss this in terms of human rights, or we don't have those issues at the moment. And also almost the last point that I wanted to make is that there has been a shift also to this sort of individual accountability in international regime. I think this is important, and we see also big challenges in imposing this new system. Last but not least, I think we tend to think about human rights as, yes, some sort of, at least it's my understanding, perhaps I'm wrong, that human rights, or the beginning of the debate was somehow Western. So when you said it's not the West against the rest, I like this very much. I mean, we have to, at the end of the day, come back to the universal aspect of this human rights thing. But shall I use my privilege of being the moderator here, that I could introduce the debate myself, give you a couple of points that I hope you can respond to, and then we'll take questions from the audience. When we started this panel, one of the points that I wanted to make, I mean, if we look at the human rights debate globally, what we see is that the Europe, or shall we call it the West, if you wish, our arguments, in a way, or the sort of moral standing, to an extent, has been undermined now because of this weakness that Europe, because of the economic crisis, overspending, debt, all these things, all these difficult issues has. So when we now go to China, please bail us out, I mean, what sort of arguments come from the other side? I mean, we want it to be a role model, and are we still a role model? And also, we have been dealing throughout the years, during all this time of major human rights abuses, as we call them, in many countries, we have been dealing and working quite closely with very difficult countries with a terrible human rights record. How far can we now go trying to criticize them? I do remember one of I'm afraid it was the Secretary of State Clinton, who said that, how far can you go criticizing your banker? So could you please, not in any particular order, respond to those questions, and we start taking questions then from the audience. Is there anybody who'd like to volunteer to be the first? Frank, could you?
Well, I can try. I think one of the interesting thing which I sort of try to refer to is that for some reason people, especially living in Western Europe and the United States, always feel that we need to have the solution to every single problem in the world. And suddenly if we're told that actually you are not necessarily part of the solution, you're part of the problem, we just sort of lose the ground under our feet and we get really upset about the fact that we can't solve all the problems of the world. And I think that in human rights, it is always important to keep the balance in being as forceful as you can in pushing your point to regimes who you do not necessarily like, but at the same time being quite crystal clear that it needs to be the local population who actually are those who decide what they want to do, and that we should not be imposing our models, our solutions onto them. And I'm a strong believer in people power. And I think that in the long run, no totalitarian regime can survive. They will just fall sooner or later. Unfortunately, it might be later because of the fact that the criticism that is coming from the outside and the support that is coming for the local initiatives from the outside still isn't really, as both of them aren't really as strong as we could be. Going back to the role model, I think again that I think it is dangerous to think of ourselves as role models because that already puts us sort of above the others. And that is not a very equal way of looking at things. And there is huge wisdom among people in Africa. There is huge wisdom among people in China. There is huge wisdom all over the world. And it is not really for us to come and bring our models to them. It is for us to make sure they have an opportunity and a voice to sort of put their own alternatives, put their own visions on the table. And that means creating the democratic space needed for them to be able to do it. And that means putting certain kind of very strong pressure on those governments who don't allow it, but then being very careful not to interfere in sort of actually imposing our models on them as well once they have that space.
Thank you. Please.
Following up on what Frank said, I think the idea of a role model is maybe also something of the 20th century to draw a line there. And I think let's say the European model or Western model, whatever you want to call it, is one among many. First of all, but there's another thing that I also like to share is this observation that from the idea of imposing or role model or of having the answer, we almost shifted, the Western sort of representatives or even of the human rights community, we shifted to almost self-denial and saying, oh no, everything is bad here, we don't, do it your own way. And that sometimes also leads to, I think, a false tolerance towards cultural relativism. Now everybody, even the autocratic regimes, say they do pretty well in human rights. No, human rights violations are human rights violations. I always say ask the victims, ask the people who suffer from human rights violation whether they think that autocratic regimes are doing great. But so the self-denial is also not the answer. I would be very cautious about it. But I think what is more fruitful, and maybe there's the other tendencies going in that direction is being self-critical and self-reflective. And also from my experience, regardless of what region I worked, as you know, you cannot deny, I'm a representative of the West, and I'm a product of the West in a way. So you cannot deny that, but at the moment you are sort of self-critical also about your own regime and system and countries. I'm originally from Germany, so there's a lot to talk about Germany when it comes up to the past. And people want to hear that. They want to say, well, oh yeah, you know, she's reflective, or you know, she doesn't think that Europe is the crown jewelry of everything. And that gives more credibility to everyone, whether you're working in business or in diplomacy or wherever. When people get the impression that you are self-reflective and self-critical, they do listen and they are interested, and that I can, it usually works in that sense. But this is far away from imposing or telling them what to do. And I have also a little story on that, actually, you know, being from the West. Of course, when you go to non-Western countries, particularly in academia, and you come there, you're maybe a visiting lecturer or professor, and you should talk about human rights. And usually students are like, oh, another one. So once I had a visiting professorship in Yerevan, in Armenia, so post-communist countries. It was about 10 years ago. And so the rector welcomed me and said, well, you know, it's nice to have you. You're here for a while. And he said, well, I have a good and a bad news for you. The good news is you're not an American. I said, well, you know, I don't know what's wrong about Americans, but because we had so many visiting professors from America, and our students don't want to hear that, don't want to listen to them anymore because of the way. The bad news is you're still Western. Yeah, you're from Europe. So try to do it differently. So this was a very interesting introduction to the university and to the students, who were very skeptical, and they're kind of and I had the same experience in China, by the way, when I was based there as a professor. This idea of having yet another Westerner coming to tell them what to do, what is right and wrong, is just not working anymore. So we have to also develop new methods. I don't know how successful I was, but I think we have to be aware that there is a huge prejudice and also carefulness. So I would opt, now there is no particular role model or Western model, but there is a model. And again, what I said earlier, it is still very intriguing. The European model is very, very intriguing, particularly for people who want to trigger change in their particular region, whether they are from the Arab region, from Asia. It is just one among many, and they also go to the inter-American system. They look how they do it, etc. So it's one among many, and this is a big shift over the last 10, 20 years, which I see quite positively. Then again, one more about the international pressure. I think without if sort of countries or societies close themselves up and only count on individual, on grassroots power, it's not going to work either. You know, I very much believe that this sandwich model, you know, gives us an indicator. There should be some sort of international, you call it sort of pressure or standard setting or norms that are available there. That is important, particularly for the grassroots workers who sometimes refer directly to the international level to make changes on the national one.
Thank you. Would you have anything to add to those particular points made?
I think I would just start from points that had been made earlier. One is that it's sort of a truism that democracies are better at protecting the human rights of their citizens than authoritarian regimes. The second, I think, as we're seeing now, and as you pointed out, is the state of a country's economy. I'm afraid nation states do still make a difference, has an effect on things where you see a rising economy and more affluence and a rising middle class, then you see more of a demand for things that go beyond just the basic essentials of life. I think you can see that in things even like the Pussy Riot trial in Moscow and things that are going on in China, where I read how a oligarch's son's Ferrari crash has resulted in the heir apparent to the presidency not getting it. I mean, I think these pressures, there are cracks even in probably the most rigid of societies. On the other hand, where societies offer not much hope for young people, one of the problems in the Arab states, I believe, is that you have a huge number of young people and few prospects for jobs. Maybe it's the same in Greece now, for all that I know. then you go back and you begin to, I mean, these societies tend to focus maybe on the more fundamental aspects of life. But there's a quote that I think comes from Martin Luther King's famous "I Have a Dream" speech, which was probably a big prompting of our passing a civil rights law that guaranteed equal rights to people that hadn't had it for 100 years since our Civil War, where he said something like, "The arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice." And I think, as someone was saying, I don't want to say that all authoritarian states will disappear eventually, but in many of these states, even those that are under the thumb of somebody at the moment, you can see a movement toward greater rights, building of civil society and that sort of thing. So I guess I think there's a slight definitional problem in that you can somehow separate human rights abstractly from other things that are going on in society. I'm not sure that's entirely the case. But where a society becomes more democratic and often more affluent, then becomes much easier to guarantee this Western model that you've been talking about. Where that doesn't happen, then it becomes much worse. I think, just finally, because the BRIC states have been mentioned, I think if you look statistically at what's happening now, their economies are also beginning to slow. At least two of them in the case of Brazil and India, India being still the world's largest democracy in a sort of a classic sense, are both suffering economic problems. China, I'm not sure. I think its rapid growth rate is subsiding, but they seem to be doing better. But it becomes very hard for them to maintain that our models are better than yours when suddenly the things that made their models better aren't working quite as well as they used to. So I think we have to be a little bit patient about, making summary judgments right now about which way the balance of world power is going and what's going to happen. One of my favorite quotes, which I think is often attributed to a famous American baseball player and philosopher named Yogi Berra, but was actually apparently said by somebody else like Niels Bohr, the physicist, which is that it's very hard to make predictions, particularly about the future. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we try to figure out what's going to happen some years down the road here.
No, I can't agree more. There is no end of history, as already once was said by Fukuyama, I think. That,
I think he regrets that book now, but anyway.
It could be, yes. I mean, some of the countries that we have mentioned here, obviously when you base the whole of your legitimacy on economic development alone, or the economic growth even, I'm referring to China here, for example, this is not a sign of strength only, but it is also a sign of weakness. But there is still something that I wanted to get an answer to, but I didn't quite get it. The extent that we can criticize and the extent we need to cooperate. I mean, let's look in a mirror here. I mean, we need oil countries. We need Saudi Arabia. We need Azerbaijan. We need Turkmenistan. We need energy security, right? So how far can we go? And will this change those countries one day for better? I mean, how do we go to Perdik Muhamedov in Turkmenistan and say, look, sorry, we are not going to buy your gas and your oil and connect to Nabucco unless you change A, B, C, and D. There is always this sort of an element of double standard in this rhetoric. This is what I have felt. And what Frank said at the very beginning, yes, we need to be careful not to be seen as patronizing. I mean, we need to try to speak to people, and we need to speak to people as sort of being equal. We cannot always use those sort of arguments. How far we can go? Or has ever any criticism actually produced any change? Please.
Trying to give an example from a process that I myself have been involved in for a bit over 10 years, the efforts to get an international arms trade treaty. People in the room might not know it, but there are actually more international rules that regulate the sales of bananas than there are international rules that regulate the sales of conventional arms. Because Amnesty International has documented gone through sort of everything we have said on different countries and come to that in about 65% of, 60%, almost 2/3 of all the human rights violations we document, there is usually an element of arms being used in an irresponsible way. And so we have been pushing for a strong document that puts out rules and regulations and sort of creates a system of weapons control. It's not about banning weapons, it's about putting a system for weapons control. And in this process, when we started it, we were actually sort of pushing to get absolutely everything we could into that treaty. Now we are in the process where this issue has been discussed in the UN for about 6 years. Last summer there was a big conference which failed to reach an agreement because unfortunately the United States and Russia on the last day just sort of pulled the carpet under the process and said, sorry, we don't think this is the kind of treaty we want, and decided to sort of stop the process there. At the General Assembly, the 157 states agreed, nobody voting against, that they will continue the process. And now we face the dilemma that we can either get a treaty that is absolutely the strongest possible, and we can probably get, let's say, 120, 130 countries that will vote for that kind of a treaty. But that will leave Russia, China, the United States, Egypt, and actually quite a few of the major arms producers and major arms exporters outside of the treaty. And this is in a sense a honest dilemma, because we have the option of sort of wanting something which is maybe better than nothing, but not as good as it could be if we want these arms producers in, or we can push for it to get the strongest possible treaty, but then it will be, in practice, it will be weaker, because then the biggest players will not be there. And this is a political, tactical decision where there is no sort of absolute clear answer, what is the best way to proceed, and we are still actually debating it. And this is what reality is. I mean, also when a Finnish minister goes to China, what the journalists will always ask is, well, did you discuss human rights? And they will say yes. They will have to have human rights on the agenda. And I was once accused by the president's assistant of accusing the Finnish president of lying because he had a 20-minute discussion with the Chinese premier, and afterwards he said that sort of Chinese human rights were discussed fully at this meeting. And taking into account interpretation, etc., I said, well, apparently you didn't talk about anything else then during that meeting, which of course they also did. So it's become a bit of a ritual that sort of they want to talk about it, but they actually have other interests which just run over. Because as Douglas was saying, it is a bit dangerous to look at human rights as if it was a cocoon, sort of, and the rest of the world was outside. The rest of the world is there constantly, every day. And inevitably, it's a political struggle and a political battle. And you always have to see what we can do. I naturally think that in many instances, I would have wished those authorities, when they speak with authoritarian governments and when they speak with democratic governments who are doing something wrong, that they should always be on the agenda.
I can add to that. I think on the one side, we should not overestimate our impact as Western representative, whether we are private come in a private capacity to these countries or in an official, but we should also not underestimate it. And on the one side, sometimes I hear this from colleagues, but also from diplomats who say, oh, we cannot tackle human rights issues in China because then I don't get a visa, then we get restriction. And there have been cases to a certain extent. But on the other side, I know so many people who constantly talk about human rights from the outside, and they do get visas and go back. So we should also not overestimate our impact. We should be very realistic what we can do. Now, we should not underestimate it. in terms, it's what Frank said, it's the way how you approach it. I think that if you take human rights as a Cancun, oh, by the way, it's agenda item number 10, now I'll talk about the concentration camps, about the labor situation, about whatever in China. No, this is, I would say, it has very, very little impact. On the other side, when you inform yourself, regardless what country, and you say, look, you made concessions in this terms, and usually the countries are interested to also, let's say, keep stability and peace inside the country. That works well for many countries to let's say, shapen and sharpen your own arguments when you talk and discuss, and link it to their own interest in development of their societies, human rights issues. And as you've been mentioning, I'm going back in a couple of days to work with the Chinese Academy of Social Science, which is a sort of one of the few think tanks left to the Chinese government. What are we talking about? We're talking about actually development, cultural human rights issues that are important also in the Chinese context, that can open windows and doors to other issues of human rights. They know exactly what they are talking about. So it's a kind of how you connect human rights issues to their, let's say, local or domestic needs, and then you can make a difference. And therefore, I would say we should not underestimate it. And it's not imposition, it's not a separate agenda item. I would absolutely defer from that. And again, it's also the idea that maybe was created again in the Cold War, that human rights are something abstract, it's a means and an end in itself. No, it's a toolbox. These are tools. They are tools to unlock, to repair, to do something with it. So, and I think when we see them more as tools, then we also have better arguments, all of us, not only the Western. I know particular Chinese colleagues who work on this toolbox basis, and they can make a lot of difference within China. And they do not actually need any advice from the outside. They know exactly how to use it. So I think yes.
Frank, do you have any additions to make? Oh, excuse me, Douglas.
Well, I just, I'm going to sound like the American warmonger that I probably secretly am here for a moment, but I'd just say that nations do have interests. I haven't followed the arms treaty, but I remember some years ago when it came to the Ottawa Convention on Landmines, Finland and the United States were strangely aligned because Finland was concerned about a certain border it has. I don't know if Estonia is or not. And the United States basically wanted an exception that would allow us to keep landmines in Korea, where we have something like 39,000 soldiers, and they felt it'd be nice to have a little protection when the million-man army of North Korea came pouring across the border. So sometimes, if you are absolutist and refuse to make any accommodation, you don't get the big countries, and quite often mine, as Ambassador Rapp said this morning, it takes us a long time to ratify anything. So I do think we have to bear that in mind. We have to be a little realistic. I mean, there are limits, I think, on how much nations will surrender their sovereignty, and in the case of the U.S., which rightly or wrongly feels that it's provided a security umbrella for Europe and its allies, Japan as well, for many years, it has certain interests it has to protect, and I guess these sometimes conflict with human rights aspirations, and just as you say, we don't always criticize our bankers. I mean, your basic question, when has it worked? I think it's worked in some cases, and then there are a lot of others where people are impervious to criticism. One of my experiences, to go back to the OSCE, I remember in the summer of 2002, where the permanent representatives meet every week in this thing called the Permanent Council. And that was a lovely summer where I found myself as the acting perm rep most of the time. And every week we were pounded for Guantanamo, for unsigning the ICC, the Rome Statute, and other things. And we listened and we responded. I mean, but it as you can see, it didn't it didn't change our behavior immediately. When the Obama administration came in, they immediately renounced certain things that the previous administration had done in the way of dealing with the handling of prisoners and renditions and things like that. So it does have an effect, but it may not be immediate, and it may take time and effort on others' part, but even big countries listen.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, we have questions already. Please, let's take about 3 questions at a time or so. Please, 1, 2, and okay, let's start there.
Luca Silves, chairman of the board of the Museum of Occupations in Tallinn. You've spoken a lot about problems that we have with the sort of nation-state Western model, but you've also spoken about a lot of the solutions, a more multi-stakeholder approach, internationalizing human rights organizations to have a local presence. And sometimes it seems as though we're doing what needs to be done, but the rhetoric hasn't caught up to reality yet. And I wonder whether what would be productive is a bit of a more humble rhetorical turn on the part of the West, which is to say, instead of coming in the form of a teacher, come in the form of a storyteller, because our own human rights stories are in fact incredibly compelling. And the thing that it might be most productive to say in China is not, you're mistreating Ai Weiwei, or you're mistreating Guangcheng, I'm sorry, I got the name wrong. But in fact, these people are just like Sakharov or Entarto, or for that matter, Martin Luther King in their battles, and that we've gone through these difficulties, we've done the same bad things as societies, and we've ennobled these people. And I guess I ask, first of all, is it perhaps the rhetoric that's behind the acts? And then the second question I ask is that, I mean, you talk about we the West. 25 years ago, it would have been you the West and us the East. So there are a whole lot of countries that are Western in Eastern Europe, countries like South Korea, that wouldn't have been Western 20 years ago. So when you talk about all these difficulties of what the West can do and what the West can say, are we Easterners or new parts of the West somehow in a different position? And is there a way in which, to capitalize on this, you might be able to use us as, I don't want to say rhetorical pawns, but as rhetorical force maximizers or force multipliers? Thank you.
There was also a lady in red, please. Yes.
Tere õhtust, minu nimi on Merle Haru ja Inimõiguste Instituudi juhatuse liige. Aitäh teile. Ma väga vabandan, et ma jäin hiljaks. Eile kahjuks ei tulnud lennukid Kesk-Euroopast. Krakowis oli lennujaam kinni. Ja mis ma tegin Krakowis? Krakowis oli 3. inimõiguste hariduse rahvusvaheline konverents. Ja eile käisin mina Auschwitzis. Ja sellepärast ma küsingi meie panelistide käest, kui palju me saame õppida sel juhul sellest ajaloost, mida me täna kanname, nii Euroopas kui ka mujal maailmas. Mida me saame õppida sellest, et oma tulevastele põlvkondadele õpetada seda, et olla inimene inimeste seas, see ongi see inimõiguste õpetamise alus, et me saaksime pakkuda oma tulevastele põlvkondadele just nimelt neid väärtusi, mida me ise täna väärtuslikuks peame. Ja veel üks teave Hiina kohta, mis on väga oluline. Järgmise aasta inimõiguste hariduse konverents toimub Taiwanil. Aitäh!
Did you get the second part of the second question as well? Through the interpreters, or shall I refer? All right, okay. Sorry, I missed the name, but a lady in red went to Krakow to take part in a 3rd Human Rights Education Conference, and that conference trip included a visit to Auschwitz. And the basic question, if I got it right now, was that how do we teach people to be people among people? And the third point that she made also, that the next conference of that kind will take place, this is more in a form of a comment, I think, will in fact take place in Taiwan. So please.
Go on this, okay. First question, I think also maybe others can refer to the storyteller. I absolutely agree with you. I was maybe a little bit cryptic about this, but when I say, look, be more self-reflective, and it was actually something that I learned from my colleagues, particularly from far Eastern Europe, where I was working in the Caucasus for a couple years, and where they said, just talk about your own country. Just, because I had all this human rights capacity building, I was a lecturer for human rights, and I knew I couldn't start just telling, look, this is the norms, apply them, and you do all wrong. And that's exactly what you're referring to. So telling the stories about your own legacy, particularly from where you're from, and as I said, I'm originally from Germany, so there's a lot to talk about. And it's good, you can start right from the beginning and go through, and it opens the other side and listening, I would say, I would absolutely confirm this as helps. And also Europe and all its flaws, what I said earlier, Europe is not perfect, but talking about this, that it is not perfect, but also about the achievements. And again, it's not, and I agree with you, it's about, and a lot of the people, I come from human rights education field, that's why and I know about the Krakow conference, unfortunately I couldn't be there, it has changed tremendously over the last 10 years, how we talk about human rights or how we educate. And I only work on with politicians and sort of adult education. It had completely changed. When you even look at the methodology, or let's at the training books or literature 20 years ago, it was really like, here's the norm, apply it. And that you won't find nowadays. Someone who's doing it serious would never do this and say, well, this is wrong and right, and this is the norm, apply it. So storytelling, rhetoric is very, very important. What we learn from the past, it connects definitely to this. And I would say even when because you always have the label of you're European, even now that you will say in Europe we have the debate between East and West. But when you're outside Europe, they would not distinguish. If you're from Estonia or Poland, they say, well, you're Western. It's interesting. Actually, my colleagues from Eastern Europe say this when they go to Asia. They are, in custody of being Europeans and Western. But I think if you go outside Europe, or even within Europe, when you go to other parts in Europe, if you don't tell the story about your own country and about your own past and what we learned from it, and we should also be aware that what you have been saying earlier, that the whole human rights regime as we have it today is either a legacy of World War II or the Cold War, and that is a very shared history and story, and that is of interest to other parts in the world, I would say.
Please, if you wish to respond as well.
What was it? Yeah.
Is there anybody else who wanted to make a comment on this?
I could try.
Please.
On the legacy of Auschwitz, I would be as sort of, then again, seeing myself as a representative of Europe as a whole, I would be very, very humble, because I think that if we look at Europe's larger colonial history, that is a long series of genocides all over the world that culminated in the Holocaust in Auschwitz. And I think that if there's something we've learned from that, and even more recently from the Rwandan genocide, it is to quote Hannah Arendt, the banality of evil, that in certain kind of circumstances we are all probably capable of becoming genocidaires. If we are put in that kind of a position. And I think that sort of going to talk, if we wanted to have a human rights dialogue with people in Africa and with people in parts of Asia and Latin America, it is the colonial heritage that we as Europeans, even though maybe Finland or Estonia were not sort of taking part in that we have to in some sense address and look back at. Naturally, I'm also quite aware of the recent history of Estonia. How could I not be? I mean, the singing revolution is etched there as a picture of how the people here chose to do things differently, and of course made your own choices, joining the EU, joining NATO, and then living according to the sort of value-added systems that going into that community means. Yes, I like the fact, the humility. I think we should be strong in our positions, but more humble in how we present them.
Thank you. I was kindly brought the notice that we're soon out of time. Please, your response, and if you have 1 minute to close, thank you very much.
I realize I'm standing between everybody and drinks and dinner, but I did want to say that I think that's a fair point about rhetoric. I'm not sure East-West is valid anymore, but I think I would distinguish between democracies and authoritarian regimes and gradations in between as sort of a way to make a distinction. But I would say I'm not, just going back to my OSCE experience, quite often people in Central Asia, if I can say this, the Russian Federation, would protest at things that maybe the United States would say and others, because you're treating us like students and you're the teachers. And I also think it's a bit of a rhetorical means to say we're not going to do, what we signed up to do here. And so while there may be a bit of that, I think it shouldn't be allowed to be an excuse for not conforming to standards and conventions that these countries have in fact signed up to and pledges that they've made, which it often is. On Auschwitz, I just say tomorrow morning I'm flying to Belgium for the semi-annual meeting of a body with the unwieldy name of the Task Force for International Cooperation on Holocaust Education, Remembrance, and Research. When I was in Bosnia and Herzegovina, human rights education was one of the things we dealt with. I find these very hard terms to define. There's a huge debate among Holocaust educators about how you deal with, how you teach students about what happened 70 years ago. As someone once said to me, you can't, and this is a bit more pertinent to Germany and Austria, you can't teach 16-year-olds that their grandparents were murderers. It just doesn't work anymore. So there's quite a lively debate. Again, like human rights, I'm not sure you can extract human rights as an educational thing. It's about respect for other people, respect for minorities, the values that we should all have in our societies. And it's in the U.S., at least some years ago, they called this civic education, which is a term I think I preferred. It's about citizenship and a democracy and tolerance and these kinds of things. So in the history of what happened, just a last word on the Holocaust, now that I deal with it, there are about as many reasons for why the Holocaust occurred as there are people who write about it. They range from every German was an anti-Semite to, there were economic problems that gave rise to this. I don't know, it's a mystery to me, but what I think distinguishes every act of genocide that I can think about is that a group was singled out for vilification. They became scapegoats for whatever problems you had. As Ambassador Rapp said this morning, then you had things like, I forget the name of the radio station, but it just incited people to violence. If you have a regime that's doing this deliberately, this is what precipitated the war in the former Yugoslavia as well, where somebody's designated the other, they're labeled a threat, we have to exterminate them. Then you have this problem. The great mystery of Germany is that its Jewish population was something like 2% of its overall population. So this wasn't, a major part of Germany was considered probably the most civilized and cultured nation in the world at the time. It's a great mystery. So how you teach a mystery is also a problem. But I think the other thing, one last word, countries where there was perhaps collaboration or complicity, unless they come to terms, as you said, with their own history. This is a great problem in Holocaust education now. Just over the weekend in the Financial Times, there's an article about a film in Poland, which is a fictional description of what happened at a village called Jedwabne, where Polish people massacred Jews. And there's a huge uproar because, not to pick on Poles, we all have, even the US has problems facing its own history, but if you can't come to terms with what happened, what your own people did sometimes, it's very difficult to teach the lessons of Auschwitz. I'll leave it at that.
I'm afraid the clock is ticking just mercilessly. There will be so many other things to discuss. I hope we can continue our discussions over a glass of red, white wine and at dinner. Thank you. Not Estonian wine. Thank you so much for your patience, your participation here, and thank you so much for the panelists for this last concluding session. Frank Johansson, Anja Mir, Douglas Davidson, thank you very much, and please a big round of applause.